Hey everyone, welcome to our AMA number 2. My name is Jorge Escobar, Esfubar everywhere else. Um, a happy Friday, everyone. Wait, today is Sunday? Oh, sorry about that. I think I had a little bit of a mistake in there. Nah, I'm kidding. I had a training on Friday that came kind of like out of the blue, so wasn't able to come in to the AMA, but I apologize. I think that's the last time or one of the few times that that's going to happen. So I am so sorry about it. And hopefully you guys were doing something fun on Friday. I was, like I said, doing a training, and it was the first time I'm able to do one of my courses in real time with students, and that was really a little bit scary because you don't know how your course is gonna work on real time, and I had the luck, I guess, because it was a little bit of luck that the course it was the Git course, the essential Git course that you can see on Udemy, um, and other places. Now I'm kind of like syndicating the courses to other companies. Maybe you've seen them on Safari Online, online books, and other places. But in any case, it was pretty exciting. I was able to do the course, and I scheduled 2 days, and it worked out really well. It was essentially like day one was kind of like the basics, and day two it was more like of the remote, like the GitHub part. So like I said, it was a great opportunity, and it was a lot of fun. And let me see, there's some people here. There's 3 watching, which is cool. I don't know if you guys want to say hello. This is the AMA, so you can ask me anything about my courses, Git, Flask, and Docker. So let's like I did last week. I'm going to do some of the Udemy questions if you don't have any questions, but definitely make sure to check out and subscribe to my newsletter. If you go to FromZero.io/newsletter, it takes a second, and I'm gonna be able to send you like notifications when I'm doing this live AMAs, as well as when I put up new videos, and also when I put out new courses. Like I mentioned last week, I'm working actively with my brother Luis to do the to do my own Udemy sort of like um, uh, course platform. So that's gonna be pretty exciting. We're very like almost done. So it's coming along really nicely. But in the meantime, please make sure to register on the newsletter so that you can get these updates. Um, the other thing is you can follow my accounts. Twitter account is on FromZero.edu, and of course, if you're already on the YouTube channel, the channel is /FromZero.io. So you don't have to type all this stuff. You can do FromZero.io, and you'll get to the channel. So enough of that. So let's start doing some questions and answers. I picked some cool questions that I got this week from Udemy students. But like I said, if you're here in the channel, don't be a stranger. Just pop your questions there. I have um, the chat window open. So All right, so the first question I'm gonna answer today is from Ritesh, and Ritesh, it's a very interesting question. Uh, it's around the factory pattern. So if you haven't done the advanced Flask courses, you might not know exactly what we're talking about here. But essentially, what's happening is that on the advanced scalable Python, which is the second um, um, like class that follows the introduction to class. And hi, Ricardo. Ricardo is saying hi. Great job. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricardo. From your last name, I think you're coming in from Brazil. So awesome to have you here, and thank you for following me. I'm not sure if you're a Udemy student or a YouTube subscriber, but really enjoy having you guys around, and like I've said other times, I learn more from you than you learn from me, I think. So thank you for the opportunity. But once again, the factory pattern is essentially a pattern where, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the difference. So this is how we do it in the introduction to Flask course. And it's essentially you do an init. Well, right now the folders here are not showing the right thing, but this is set on the init py of the application, and we just put app in there, like straight up. We put the app in there. We configured from the settings file. We put the migration in there. We put the SQL alchemy in there, and the problem with that is that it's not the app in that instance is not a factory pattern. So a factory pattern means that you create an object that then becomes the application. In this case, as you can see, it's just like we're doing an instance of the Flask app on initpy, and that's it. You don't get any you don't do a factory. You just create this app variable that is holding the instance of the Flask. Whereas in a factory pattern, which is what we use on the advanced course, and what I do actually on my professional applications, we have this definition of defining a create app method that then throws back, as you can see here, returns the app itself. So that's called a factory. A factory means it creates this object that then you can do multiple objects of that, or you can each one, it's kind of like its own Flask application. So going back to the question, so he's saying I mentioned in the course that it gives more flexibility to do it this way to test the app. So why is that? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Had some tab switching in there. Sorry. So why is that? So the main thing is that when you do it this way, you can have this config overrides that essentially allows you to override the settings py of the file and set up or override the normal settings py variables that you have in there. So and you can only do that if you're doing it through a factory pattern. I should also talk a little bit. You don't have to like understand too much about patterns. There's a lot of patterns, but the most used ones you kind of use already if you follow my courses. One of the top ones, or the most used ones today, is called the MVC pattern, model view controller, and you all know what that is. Like, you have all the database operations on the models, you have all the views are the controllers. So in our case, it's the views py, which is a little bit confusing because the view is actually the templates on the MVC approach on Flask. So sometimes Flask is called an MVT pattern, which is model views py, which are the controllers, the C, and T, which is the templates, which are actually the views. But in any case, you separate the models, which is the database operations. You have, I'm trying to get to not to sneeze here. Then you have the views, which are the controllers, which are the ones that trap all the routes and kind of manage all the state of the application and talks to the database to fetch things out through the model, and then throws things to the view, which is the template. So that's a pattern. That's a software pattern. Separating those things in three instead of having them all in one file allows you to scale the application better. The factory pattern is also it's another type of pattern, which is a factory pattern essentially says, you can create kind of like an instance of an object, and then you can reuse that factory because it produces applications or objects as you wish. So in this case, we're doing a create app and returning the app, versus here we have the app. It's just like you call the app from everywhere else on the views. So going back to the test, so this is the tests that we have in the first course, in the introduction course, and you can see here that we have a user test, and it's it has all the tests in it. But if you notice the setup, you have to pass all these settings for to start the database, and you configure an engine, and you connect to it, and then you execute a commit, and then you create the database, and then you create all the databases, and then you close the connection and you start the client. And actually, what happens is that every time you run one of the tests, for example, login, all this setup has to be created, and then the tear down is also called. So that's pretty much very convoluted. And imagine this is just like one test file. I believe that's the only test that I created on the blog. Let me I think I have the blog in here. So if I do ls, yeah, that's the only test I have. So I don't have any testing. So imagine if we had to test like the user, the user is tested, but imagine if we had to test the blogging functions, maybe the comments. Well, the comments would be on the blog, under the blog, but other parts of the application. You don't have to put them all in here in this file, or create other files, but then every single file you have to set up all this stuff, and it's like very repetitive, right? So so instead of creating all this, what you can do with the factory pattern is, look at that. This is the setup. It's 2 lines. And what you do is like you're actually overriding. You see how we have a create base, app base, and you set up the different, in this case we use MongoDB, but it would be MySQL settings, testing equals true, all that. And then the setup, we just like call this create app function or method, and then you do self app factory test client. And because we're getting the app from the application as a factory up here, then you don't need to do all the stuff that we had to do here. You see how much more simple it is? It's because we can override the application settings with this config overrides right here. So and the config override happens right here in create app base. You see how I'm passing this like this list of settings. That's what's being passed in here in the config overrides ***. That *** means that there are multiple keyword arguments that are being passed, and any keyword argument that you pass to the create app is going to be overwritten from the settings file. So that's very very useful. Notice the order of operations here. So first it loads the settings PY. So whatever you have on settings PY is loaded. But then it says config update, config overrides, and that's where all these things are being overridden there. So, and this allows us like to make, you know, in the Flask book, which is the application that I do on the advanced, you can do multiple test files and they're very clean. Look at this. It's kind of like it's very, and there's a lot of user tests right here, as you can see. But the setup is really much manageable with the factory setting, with the factory pattern. So that's the answer right there. That's why factory patterns gives more flexibility in testing the app. So thanks, Ritesh, for that question. So the next question, and this is a little bit related, so I put it next to this factory pattern. What is the app? And this one is from the API course. And I'm saying like, you know, all the time, oh, the app this and the app that. So for example, in the, this is the, I think this is the Flask book. Yeah, this is the Flask book. This is the advanced course. So here you see how I have a home directory and I have a user directory and I have a feed directory, and I call this apps. This comes from Django. So in Django, and I haven't done a Django course yet. I'm gonna do it. So if you're waiting for that, that's definitely gonna come. In Django, this different directories that have views and models and controllers, they're called apps. And I like that naming convention, because an app, you can think of an app as an app in your mobile phone, right? If you have a mobile phone, you have the apps and they each do like different things. In this case, if you when we put all the functions and all the views and all the models encapsulated, that's the word I was looking for, encapsulated in a folder, we can think of that as an app. So the user app is something that you can potentially use, just copy and paste in another project, and you have all the user things in there. So that's why kind of like I think they called it an app, because it's independent, self-contained functionalities of your application. So in this case, I have a home app. I usually have a home app because anything related to like the slash, like just going to the slash of your application, that should be handled in a different kind of folder, right? But user, so, and one way to like think about the apps is that you have, for example, in the Flaskbook application, you have, let's say, you know, Flaskbook, let's say this is flaskbook.com, which doesn't exist, /user/register, right? You see that order of operations there, like user, register. The app is user and the register is the function on that views py. So this is a little bit of a RESTful approach. But then you can separate things, like if I have a feed operation, let's say the feed is the home, that would be under the feed app. And if I want to post a new item to the feed, I do feed post or feed item and do a post method to that. And then that item has post, create, delete, post, get, an update and delete methods, which is the CRUD methodology that I teach on the RESTful API. But you don't have to have an API to follow that pattern or that approach. So think of anything /blah, that's an app, and then /blah, that's the function within the views py. So going back to the question, the app, what I call the app is that functionality that's isolated, so that you can have, not only you have the views and the models um, you also have the tests. So for example, I could have user tests in here. I have another app here. It also has tests. The relationship app, it has its own tests. So it allows you to very much isolate and separate these things so that you can scale them better, you can maintain them better, and potentially, if you have a development team, different team members are working in different apps, so there's less like conflicts and problems. So that's what apps are. And Tom says, thanks Tom for the question, by the way. Throughout the lesson, you refer to an app. I thought that the web app we're building is the app. So yeah, I call the whole thing not the app, but it's kind of like the application, and app meaning these mini little things. But it looks like there can be a number of apps with different IDs and expiry dates. Should an app in this use be understood as a user session? Thanks. Well, it's not a user session, but definitely user-related functions. So thanks, Tom, for that question. That was really cool. Let's see what else. The next one we have Requestform versus Requestvalues. And oh, I thought I had a window here. Let me see. Yep, I have a window here. So what, thanks Hamza for the question. So what I sometimes in the course, I think on the intro course, I used Requestvalues at some point in the beginning, and then I switched to Requestform. Hi Geronimo, I didn't see you there. Oh, he has a really good question. So actually, Ivan, I'm going to be doing a YouTube video just to address that, because I recently saw he's asking me if that I just mentioned that I'm gonna have a Django course, and he says, what do you think about what some people say when you use Flask, you end up building a Django? But I actually the video I'm going to so that's a good question, but I'm going to put up a YouTube video about the differences or which one is better. Like, this is something that really takes me in the wrong way. I saw a video recently of a more or less well-known instructor saying that Django is better than Flask. What? And there's this this conception that one is better than the other, or no, it's two different use cases, and I'm gonna post a video about that. But what Geronimo is saying here is that he says, what do you think about what some people say that when you use Flask, you end up building a Django? I disagree with that statement, and sorry that I'm kind of like jumping a little bit here, because I think that's a very good question. Flask is sort of, and I'm gonna advance a little bit of what I'm telling in the video, but Flask is like driving a car with like stick, like manual gear transmission. So you have to like put first and then switch second, and you have a clutch, and you're controlling everything. And Django is more like an automatic car where you just like put drive and you forget about it. Now, there are instances where you want to have just the drive like setting, and that's it, and you don't want to be worried about anything else, versus with the gears you have much more control over the car. And even though it's not 100% like that, because you can also like micro control some parts of Django, or you can override some functions, the what I find cool about Flask is that you start from a very small footprint, and then you kind of like grow from there. So at a certain moment, I agree, if your Flask application is super complicated, and it starts to get a lot of like libraries just to do, let's say you have 15 libraries or 20 on requirements.txt, then it's true, you're approaching a Django level of Flask, in the sense that you should have like just done this whole thing with Django instead of with Flask. So there is some truth to that, but I would say a big number of applications out there don't need the whole Django engine behind it. you could start with something simpler. For example, I find that it's really good to have Flask for RESTful APIs. Like I'm actively working on a professional project where the API it's just an API. There's hardly any templates or anything, and we're doing it with Flask. But um, it's better to start, I think, simple and with a small footprint. And if that's the case, then you start with Flask. But if you know beforehand that the application is going to be very complicated, then definitely you should use Django. But like I said, I'm going to do a Django course, and you guys are going to be able to see the differences and why Django is called an all batteries included framework versus Flask is kind of like more you control the stuff. But thanks for that question, Ivan Geronimo. So let's continue here. So Requestform versus Requestvalues. So in the course, in the introduction to Flask course, I would use this, Requestform username later in the course, but at the beginning I was using request values. And so Hamza is saying, when I test both requests, I get the same result. I am wondering what is the difference. Very good question. So she says if I use Requestform, let's say .get and in this case, username, or Requestform username, or if she does Request.values username, she gets absolutely the same the same effect. So why is that? Like, why would you use one or the other? So the answer to that, as always, is in the documentation. So here's the documentation, and I'm gonna put all the links on the post so that so don't worry if you don't see the URL very well, or you want to like keep track of this. But so what the difference is that Requestform is a dictionary that has all the post values. So all the post values that you put on your form. So in this case, in this, we have a form here where I think it's a little bit, in further there. So you have this form, and you have username. The input is name username, and then you have password and the input name password here. When you do Requestform is going to have username and password in its values, right? Now, if for some reason you would have a need to get also the parameters that you pass on the URL itself, like, so for example, let's say again flaskbook.com, and you have this structure here, username equals xxx, right? And as you know, it's not good to send like let's say confidential information on the URL, even if it's HTTPS. Some people that are kind of like between you and your end user can potentially log that request in a server, and then you could have like potentially problems there. So it's better if you have username, password, things like that, always use post and not get. But let's say that you have something like, let's say the referrer ID is an anonymous number that nobody will ever find out if they don't use the number. So what do we do there? Well, Requestform is not going to get that. So for that, we would use request args, which is the contents of the query string. So if we did in this case referrer ID request.args.get referrer ID, then we would get 4556633, right? Now, a cool function that Flask has is values, and values mixes both the form and the arg. So if you have, let's say you have, for some reason, this form right here also has a /login/ I don't know, site ID equals 5, right? So for some reason you want to know from which site this login is happening. So you would need to read both things, and you don't want to use both request form and request args. You can get request values. And at that moment, let's say again, if you have login question mark site ID equals 5, request values is going to have site ID, username, and password in all all in one dictionary. So that's what the difference is. So but that's why you are getting Hamza, you're getting both request form and request values. You get the same username and password because it's mixing both post and arguments on the URL, which are the get arguments. So it's mixing get and post variables. Now, which one do you use? That's a very good question. I typically, if there's nothing being passed, well, first of all, it's weird or rare that you pass both get and post requests on one call. It's better to keep them separate, right? But again, that's not a rule. That's something that can vary between applications. So in this case, what I'll say is if you have that use case where you want to read both the get and the post, then you can use request values. But most of the time, I think I use just request form or request args, because it's usually like either or. It's kind of like, well, if I'm landing on this page and there's some arguments in the get, then I process that on the request args section of the view, right? So again, going back to the view, I would do that before the request method. And if you're doing forms and you're using WTF forms, you would have something like on form on validate. But I would use the request args before that, and then once I'm inside the actual post method section, then I would use request form. It's cleaner to use request form because you're telling your end user, not your end user, all the developers that consume your code, this is coming from a form, so it's cleaner. And request args, these are things that are coming from the query param. So I leave it up to you, but that's kind of like what the difference is. So thanks, Hamza, for that question. And finally, Claudine has this also very interesting question. She says, how can I check the status of my SQL server? Like, is it running? And so I have my SQL here. Let's see. So if you use Mac, it's different than if you use Windows, of course, right? But if you use Mac, and you install it through Homebrew, the way that you would check the status would be mysql server status. And if it says error, MySQL is not running, then you know that MySQL is not running. So you do mysql.server start. That starts MySQL. And then if you do status again, it says success. So by using mysql.server status, you can check if MySQL is running or not. Now on Windows, it's a little bit trickier to get the status. I was trying to find if there was something that I could use. But once again, if you follow the tutorials, you install MySQL using Chocolatey, right? But make sure that you open PowerShell as administrator. So let's open PowerShell here as administrator. And so like I said, it's a little bit tricky to check if it's running or not. The way you would do that, and again, if you install MySQL using Chocolatey or MariaDB, you have to go through to your search bar in here and type services.msc, which is the control panel. And when you see services desktop app here, you click on that, and that'll open a window. and you see all the services that are running in your machine. So you only have to look for MySQL here. As you can see, MySQL, it says status, it's empty, so you can assume that it's not running. And actually, you can start the service from there if you wanted to. But if you're not going to check the status and you don't want to open that window, then you do net start MySQL, and that starts MySQL. And we can see here the status should change to running. I guess it doesn't refresh. Let's see. Right, so it says services stop, pause, or restart. So it's running. The weird thing is that it said it should say running here. So I don't know if I can refresh. Oh, there you go. Refresh. Yep, it says running. So that's how you know if it's running or not. So you have to go through this little panel, and if you want to stop it, you do net stop MySQL, and you stop the service. Same thing with Mac and Homebrew. You do MySQL dot server stop, and you shut down the MySQL. So that's it. That's all I had for this AMA. I got another question from Ivan Geronimo. If you're comfortable using SQL, is it okay to use raw SQL through the entire project instead of the ORM? That's a very good question. I will say it's better to use the ORM if you are using an ORM. So if you're using SQL Alchemy, it's better if you find out how to do the queries through the ORM, because they're usually cleaner in terms of looking at the code. Definitely, if you're gonna use like raw queries, please don't put them on the views PY. Just create methods on the models and put like ugly like SQL statements. Not ugly because they're ugly, but because they're long. Put them on the models, but not on the views. The ORM, the nice thing that it has is that you can put the ORM calls in there, and it works pretty well, and it reads much better. Like you're saying, oh, users.query, filter by etc. Get me the first. It reads better. And Python, the most important thing that your Python code should adhere to, which is one of the Pythonic principles, is that it should be readable. It should be enjoyable to just read that code. If you're gonna do raw queries, and don't doubt it. There are times when you want to do it manually because the ORM's approach to like a join, or if you have like a join that's really complicated, you might not want to do it through the ORM, because the ORM does, for more advanced stuff, does create really ugly queries that are sometimes they're slow, or sometimes they're not very efficient. So definitely I can see the use case where, and I do it all the time, like I have projects where say 80% of the queries are done through the ORM and 20% are done using the raw queries. So it's not too bad, but like I said, if it's simple things and you are using an ORM, like if you don't have SQL Alchemy installed or any other ORMs, and you want to do like the whole thing straight up using raw queries, you can. I don't see what the point of that would be though, because it's more readable, easier to do most of the operations through the ORM that are simple than just doing the raw queries. So I hope that answered your question. Ivan. But thank you. That's a very very good question. That I haven't asked. I haven't been asked that. I think ever, and I think it's a good thing to clear that up. All right, so I think that's it. I don't want to be here too much time taking your guys' time on a Sunday. Go enjoy, rest, and because tomorrow is a working day. But next week, definitely check out the AMA on Friday at 5 p.m. GMT, 12 p.m. Eastern. Um, I really thank you for again for coming, and follow me on Twitter FromZero.edu. Sign up for the newsletter at FromZero.io/newsletter. And if you want to follow me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram as sfubar. So see you guys in the next AMA, and look out for those videos and continue practicing every day. You need to code every day except Sunday. Sunday, take a rest, but Monday through Saturday, at least 1 hour. Remember, coding is the future, and coding takes practice. So practice, practice, practice. And I'm here for anything that you guys wanna talk to me when you're stuck. And looking forward to giving you those new materials, the new introduction to Flask course, which is coming out amazing. I'm gonna put out the Python section of it as a standalone because it's really really good, much better than what I had before, and less ums and ams. So that's it. All right, guys. See you next Friday. Take care.